I was introduced to Sinova, and I'm still Sinova, and I actually have had the privilege to get to know Mimi since yesterday. So now I know much more about film and filmmaking. So hopefully we'll have an interesting conversation, and also invite you guys to be part of the dialogue. But I'm going to start off with some questions, and then eventually we'll get some questions from the audience. But I'm going to start off with my first question. Do you want to say, you started today saying this is a personal film,
yeah,
and you say something about it in the film, but do you want to elaborate a little bit about on that?
Yeah, before I tell you this, every screening I've had in the last 2 years, and I've been personally present at over 60 screenings in many different cities, and each screening is different, and at every screening I get different questions. You know, there are some of the same questions, but then there is always something new that pops up. So but what I wanted to tell you is when I see young faces in the audience, it makes me so happy, because the reason I made this film was for your generation, and it's for you to use it in any positive way that you can use it. So when I look at your faces, it makes me smile, plus this really nice drink makes me smile too. It's really good stuff. It's my first time drinking this, so. Yeah, it's a personal film because of where I grew up and because of the conditions in which I grew up, you know, in a very small community in a village, very close to the Greek border, right next to Macedonia, in the southwest of Bulgaria, and grew up during communism. And when the system collapsed in 1989, a year later, my mom and I immigrated to the US. I was 13 at the time. And then 2 years later, I returned home to the same village to visit my friends. And a lot of them had also gone to other countries, immigrated. Some of my girlfriends were older than me. So at that point I'm 15 and they were 18, 19 years old. And you know, some of them were okay, some of them had gone with their parents, others had gone on their own, and there were a few, I would go to their grandmother's houses and ask, you know, have you heard from her, where is she? And there were a few that hadn't been heard from, which was really strange, because when it was such poor times, it was such desperate economic times, that people who were left behind relied on remittances. They relied on us sending money home. So for someone to just not be in touch went completely against the culture and completely against what you're supposed to do. But I'm 15, no one ever at that point knew, this is 1992, 92, and no one knew that there was such a thing as young girls being sold into slavery against their will and being offered legitimate jobs. We just did not question this. We grew up in this system that was a bubble, where we thought if things are really bad at home, it cannot get any worse somewhere else, because it's already so shitty here that somewhere else has to be better. Which is also when I'm interviewing the older people in the village and in the region where I grew up, you know, and they say, I don't know what city she is, or the shepherd who says, my granddaughter is in the United States, and I say, in which state? And he's like, I don't know anything, because it's ignorance, but it's also this concept that if she, well, it's three things. It's ignorance, it's the concept that if she has gone to the West, life there must be better, so we should not worry as much because she's in the West. And life in the West is what we see on TV. And let me tell you something, well, you probably don't know this. God, I really hope you know this. There is a soap opera, you know, in the United States. It used to be really popular in the 80s and 90s, and then got sold into Eastern Europe. And people would be watching at prime time, at 8 p.m., dinner time with the family, you had to stop conversation. You could...
Love Boat?
No, it was The Bold and the Beautiful. Do you know what I'm talking about? It's the stupidest thing ever. It's the most unrealistic. People don't live like this in the States, okay? I mean, maybe 25 people in Orange County, okay, more than 25 people, but I'm saying people don't, that's not, but in villages and towns throughout Eastern Europe, at 8 p.m., you could be talking about, you know, I don't know, give me something interesting, like something super interesting. We were just
From Bold and Beautiful. No.
I don't know, you can have the most important conversation, but when 8 p.m. came, that conversation had to stop because The Bold and the Beautiful was on. And people wanted to see how Americans lived. And no one would listen to me. I would say, you guys, this is not how I live in the United States. This is not how Americans live. There is a lot of poverty, there are drugs, there's a lot of crime. It's not like that. People don't dress like that, they don't act like this. They don't do the stupid stuff that the bold and the beautiful people are doing. Trust me, that's not life. But it was very difficult to convince because that was their impression of what the so-called West was like, right? The rich and the exuberance. And the third thing, so it was ignorance, it's this perception that the West is somehow better and safer and nicer and money grows on trees. And the third thing is probably the most important thing, which is girls are not valued as equally as boys. So if your daughter went someplace, it's a patriarchal society, it's very old school, and if your daughter went someplace else, her life and her livelihood and her safety, you know, in the community that I come from, is not placed on the same level as if you have a son. If you have a son, your expectations are much higher for his achievement and his success than if you have a daughter. And having that discussion about gender is really important because I've been doing a lot of interviews here in the last 3 days, and I keep reminding myself to say this because I stand behind this fully. I stood behind this in the beginning when I started this project, and I stand behind this 10 years later, knowing everything that I know now. If nations wanted to solve trafficking and reduce numbers, they know what to do. They know how to do it. This is not a priority, even though it looks like it is a priority on paper, and people are taking a lot of initiative and there's a lot of blah, blah, blah about it. This is not a priority because it concerns poor immigrant women that no one wants to be involved with. The system wants to wash its hands off of poor immigrant women and send them back to where they came from. And the countries of origin are not offering any opportunities for these women to have normal lives. So it's a catch-22. They're trapped in the system. And I hope you get some of that sense from watching the film. It was a very long answer to a very short question.
Thank you. There's one thing that I noticed in your film, because Vika says, who is gonna search for me? Or who is gonna, like they can, so you say that the traffickers they're not being prosecuted in Moldova, is one case that you show. Yeah. But also the sense of fear that these women, when they talk about Dubai, for instance, that they don't even have to, that the violence isn't necessarily executed, but the knowledge that no one will search and no one will be reporting you as missing. Yeah. And it sort of stuck out, and I was wondering, because you also said, like, in an earlier conversation where you said it's a missing generation. Yeah. Do you want to elaborate a little bit about what you think about around those issues?
I would love to, and you know, the one thing that really frustrates me is when people start talking about numbers. So how many are we talking about? You guys, we don't know. We don't know. Every girl I've interviewed has witnessed. There is what you're saying, which is a sense of hopelessness, a sense of no one is going to look for me because my parents cannot hire a private investigator. My parents, in whatever country, don't have lawyers. My parents don't have access to justice. And also I'm in a foreign country, and this is not, I don't have my paperwork, I don't speak the language. I know that I will be deported, I know I will be arrested, I know that I don't have any rights here. That's one side of it. But the other side is that every girl I've interviewed has witnessed murder, has actually witnessed other women being killed. Vika witnessed a girl being shot in the desert. They were being transported, a group of girls was being transported, and she couldn't keep up from some place to some car. She couldn't keep up, or she did something and the guys just shot her, execution style, and left her in the desert. So when Vika says, they'll throw me from the 15th floor, they'll bury me in the desert, they'll throw me in the ocean, she's not talking out of imagination. These things do happen. Scroll, see, I'm going to give you another example. When I was doing work in the Czech Republic, there is a place that was very well known in the late 90s and early 2000s called E55. It's a freeway. It's known, its sort of slang name is the Highway of Love. And women from all over Eastern Europe in particular would line this freeway. It was a trucking route from the Czech Republic to Germany. And there is a small town by the name of Dubi, it's D-U-B-I, it's a border town. On the other side is Germany, and on the other side is a factory that produces BMWs. So a lot of the workers on the weekend would come over, it's just a 10-minute drive, to the Czech side, and Dubi is full of brothels. It's full of that footage you see of girls dancing on the window. That's shot, you know, it's during these, it's a very brief moment, maybe you didn't catch it, but that was shot in Dubi. That's something. And there I couldn't, obviously, I couldn't go around talking about, I couldn't say I was with a Czech woman who was working for BBC World as a freelancer. And, you know, we couldn't go around saying we were journalists. So I had to come up with a story as to what the hell I was doing there, walking around and asking questions. So I came up with the following story, which is, I'm Bulgarian, true. I'm looking for a friend, not true. And I made up a physical description. I said my friend is a little bit shorter than me, she's got black hair. I described a typical Bulgarian-looking girl. You know, she's got this color eyes, you know, body, whatever. And I would go around and I'll say, you know, yeah, I'm looking for my friend, and this is my friend who is Czech. And sometimes, you know, if the person, the brothel owner, the pimp, or the madam, because there were a lot of madams as well, if they didn't speak English, you know, my friend Nadia would just translate. And I will never forget, we went into this one place, and this guy who was a pimp and also owned this hotel, adjacent hotel, he just looked at me with such sadness. You know, he just shook his head and he said, I have some bad news for you. These guys down the street buried a girl in the backyard just 3 weeks ago. I think that might have been your friend because it fits exactly the description of who you described. She tried to run away and they buried her in the backyard. So you know, you're in a place where we talk about girls disappearing and families not hearing about where they are, who they're with, what happens to them. No bodies are found, no bodies are being shipped back. So then when people ask me about numbers, how, you know, we cannot, we know a certain amount of girls who manage to escape. That's a very small percentage compared to the girls who remain, and also the girls who are no longer alive. You know, so that's part of Vika's comment.
Thank you for it, that answer. I don't. I have to switch themes, I think. But back to and go further with Vika. You started off with Vika when you started your film, and then you also end up with her. Can you say something why you made that choice? and why she in particular has that opening and also closing theme.
Yeah, Vika is very much the reason why there is a film, because I'm, you know, I always, you know, if you asked me this question 5 years ago and you said, what do you do? What's your occupation? I would have always described myself as a documentary photographer, as a photojournalist, as a conflict photographer. I was never interested in being a filmmaker because I don't know anything about filmmaking. That's not my training. I'm not a cinematographer. I just felt like it was this foreign thing that I was not qualified to do by any means. And I felt that I should just focus on my craft, and filmmakers and cinematographers should focus on theirs. And never did it cross my mind that there would be a documentary film that I would end up making, ever. My transition from photography to video was Vika, and I'll tell you why. I spent many years with her. You know, I would not continuously, I would go back to UC Berkeley where I was teaching full-time. So I would teach, and then every break I had, I would go back to Eastern Europe and photograph and interview women who had escaped. And it was very important for me to keep returning, because once you establish a connection with someone and then you start showing up, returning, going back, they see you 2 times, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times. Even in Turkey with Mike, who you see in the film, there was a running joke, which is, it's you again, you're here again, they haven't killed you yet? And I would say, yeah, like, I'm still here. And so much of him helping me was because he would see me 7 years coming and coming and coming. And it's like, wow, you're still not giving up on this, okay, you know. So it was very similar with the girls too, because it was just the consistency of, if she says she's gonna come back, she's gonna come back. There was something about Vika that I started noticing that I could not capture in a photograph. And it was the way she would smoke her cigarette. And every time she would talk about Dubai and what happened to her in Dubai, she didn't care that she would stop smoking, and I would just watch the ash just go further and further down, closer and closer to her finger, and sometimes it would burn her and she wouldn't even feel it because her mind was someplace else. And I thought to myself, I don't know how to capture this in a photograph. Maybe, you know, I'm not good enough, maybe I don't know how to make the still image that shows you what I'm seeing in front of me. It has to be a moving image, because I want you to see how she sighs, I want you to see how she moves, I want you to see how she smokes, I want you to hear what she sounds like. And to me, at that moment, it was like photography, which I would consider the love of my life, I really love photography, had reached its limitation. I felt like it needed to be something else. So that's when I decided I'm gonna, no matter how shitty and untrained I am, and what you see here, the interview you see of Vika is my very first video interview. I've never shot anything else that has moving images. And it's a terribly shot interview for many reasons, but it's the content of her story that ends up coming across the strongest. I wanted her to open the film, and I wanted her to end the film because she's strong, because she's resilient, because for me, Vika never fitted the stereotypical image, fantasy that people have of what a victim sounds like or how a victim acts. You know, she doesn't fit that by any means. For me, Vika was someone who was street smart, who, you know, has a certain level of attitude and arrogance as well, and those were my interactions with her from the very beginning, where if I said something that was off, she would yell at me, or she would get really, you know, she's just not a shy person. And for me, the fact that something like this happened to someone like her, and she could not even, someone like her who had all the skills and all the, you know, I guess in English the word would be the street savviness that would require to get out of a really bad situation, and she couldn't get out of that situation. That says a lot about the conditions in which she was trapped. for me. And when I was putting together the film with my team, I would sometimes show short segments to people. And I'll never forget a journalist friend of mine who was working for the New York Times, watching a very short clip of Vika, and his reaction was, "Oh wow, she doesn't sound like a victim. You know, she sounds too." His words were, "She sounds too together. She's too together. She seems like she knew exactly what she was doing." And to me, that was like, yes, that's exactly what I want. I want people to react this way. I do not want to make a film that's feeding the stereotypes of other things that people have seen. I want you to see different personalities. I want you to see different women who deal with the situation in different ways, yet their stories are very much similar. The trajectory of the stories is very much similar in how they were deceived and the horrors that happened to them once they were sold, and also how difficult it was to escape that situation. If you have to jump out of a window to escape, that tells you a lot, you know, of the choices that you have. And just one more thing I want to say about this. I mean, there's so many things I want to say to you. I literally sometimes think that I can sit someplace for weeks and not stop talking. That's how much stuff is in my... I mean, seriously. You could do one of those films on me, you know, your long Norwegian.
I told her about the 30-hour interview today.
I mean, we could do like 2 weeks about trafficking. Can you imagine? And you can run it straight for 2 weeks, non-stop, as long as you keep liquids.
But does it like, yeah, I think it's interesting because you're a journalist also. So you've also written newspaper issues and sort of how to frame a victim as a journalist, and you also have to think about the audience and how to sort of frame a narrative as a journalist. But you also told me that you tried to sell this movie to Oprah Winfrey show. Yeah. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, you know, you have to be aware. If you are just an artist, then you can make your art, and your audience, if your audience says, "I don't get it," you can say, "The hell with you, it's my art." But once you're doing journalism combined with art, you have a different sense of obligation, which is, it's to inform the public. So I can say, if you guys watch this film and your reaction is, "We're confused, we don't understand, you have all these holes in the story, we don't know what you mean, you know, we're leaving this space." If you guys are walking out after 15 minutes of me showing you this, then I cannot respond as an artist, I have to respond as a journalist. And as a journalist, I know that I have not made something that can effectively engage the public. And my objective is to effectively engage the public because my objective is social change. That's why I do what I do. It's to change things, excuse me. It's to change things in this lifetime, not just for your generation, but while we're here, and we're not that old, you know, but you're a lot younger, but it's to change things. It's to shake things up. It's to create the possibility for change. What was your question?
Oprah Winfrey.
Oh, yeah. So with the Oprah Winfrey, so you know, finding a good home for this becomes an objective before the film is even made. You start thinking as a filmmaker, okay, where am I going to show it? Who's going to watch it? And there was this great opportunity, which is Oprah Winfrey was starting this network called OWN, the Oprah Winfrey Network. And she was going to feature 12 documentaries per year, 1 documentary per month. And she and her producers were talking to filmmakers, particularly dealing with serious issues and women's issues, which is Oprah's, you know, as you know, her weakness is women's issues, to see if, you know, if some of these films would be a good fit for her network. So I had a meeting with her people, and it was a really interesting meeting. They had, right away, they hadn't watched the film, but they had 3 questions. The first question was, does your film have something like less than 35% of subtitles because Americans don't like to read. And I said, no, it's heavily subtitled because the girls come from so many different countries, there's like 5 different languages, so yeah, there's a lot of subtitles. So then the follow-up question to that is, would you be willing to dub it? I said, absolutely not. I think it's very important for you to hear the voices of the girls, and even if you don't understand the language, to read, you know? And again, the answer was, well, Americans don't really like to read. And so maybe it's time for them to learn, huh? And it didn't go too well. So then, question number 2 was, does your film end on a positive note? I made another joke. I said, I'm from Eastern Europe. We don't end on positive notes. It's against our culture to end on. That's you. Like, with Americans, you always got to end on happy ending. Not where I come from. So they said, you know, well, Americans like, you know, we really appreciate happy endings and sort of uplifting. Like, no matter how heavy it is, as long as the ending kind of lifts your spirits, then you guys would not have needed 5 minutes break. You know, you would have just stayed in your chairs. But apparently, you know, that was also not something that fit the criteria. And the third one was, does your film have any celebrities in it? So I had failed in every possible way. I couldn't get an Angelina Jolie. I think if I had gotten Angelina Jolie to narrate the film and then make a few appearances, like she could have played me and gone through the village, and I think I would have had a good shot. So anyway, the Oprah Winfrey network did not select the film, but I'm very grateful because I found a much better home for it, which was Women Make Movies. It's a distributor in New York, nonprofit distributor in New York, that really uses documentary films to promote education and distributes mostly in universities, colleges, libraries, and nonprofit organizations in the US and Canada. And then through them, Human Rights Watch was very much interested in this. So the Human Rights Watch Film Festival, which is a touring festival globally, picked it up and kind of made it sort of their film of the year when it was first released in 2011, and would show it in places like the Beirut International Film Festival in London and all over, you know, all over Canada. So for me, it was a much better fit. Television-wise, we released it in the US on the documentary channel, and then I really wanted television markets in Europe to pick this up, so I found a distributor in Paris that specializes with television. They have very good connections with TV networks throughout Europe and throughout the Middle East and South America and so on. So making sure it gets on TV and then making sure it gets into the proper channels to raise awareness was really important.
But yesterday someone asked a good question. Has it been screened in any of the countries that you visited?
Yeah, the only countries where it has not been screened. Well, the only place where it has not been screened is Dubai. And believe me, I'm blacklisted from ever going back to Dubai. And Turkey did not screen it. Only recently did they screen the film, within the last 3 months. And I still need to find out what festival picks it up. But Dubai, even though Dubai and Abu Dhabi, they have human rights festivals, no one wants to touch it. And it's very unfortunate. And also some of the pieces I've done for television in the US that are online are blocked in the UAE. So friends there who are trying to see them online cannot because they're censored, they're blocked. So if people don't know, but see the thing about, you know, the beautiful thing about the internet, it's very difficult to keep information from people. And there is also another beautiful thing which is called the black market. So I'm just saying that with information.
Norwegian to say.
I'm sorry. It's with information, you know, I can give a DVD to a couple of people I know who all of a sudden, will start popping up here and there, and people will still get to see it. So there are different ways that you can approach this. I'm not advocating for that, but I'm just saying, if you want to shake things up, you gotta find ways to shake things up. So you find ways to do it. But yeah, Dubai is, otherwise, yeah, incredible results in Greece, and policy change in Greece because of this work, which makes me really happy. The US State Department asked if they can use it as a training tool in embassies throughout the world. So all throughout Eastern Europe, through the US Embassy, they actually have the resources to translate the film and then take it to schools and give it to NGOs, local NGOs. So to me, that's a really good way to screen something, to show it. And then, of course, television channels, like places like in Ukraine, in Poland, in the Czech Republic. I can go down the list, all over Eastern Europe.
And the day before yesterday, you also went to the police academy in Norway. Do you want to say something? How did that feel?
I walked in, and it was toward the end of the film. They had a session on organized crime before the screening and on drug trafficking. So they wanted me to connect drug trafficking to human trafficking. And then I also wanted to connect arms, the arms trade, because those three go hand in hand. And, I walked into this room, and there were, I would say 90% of them were wearing uniforms, and I get very intimidated by uniforms, so I was just, I stood there, and then they started asking questions, and I had to be honest, one of them asked a question. I can't remember what it was. It was something about, what do you think about the police and how effective is the police? Something like that, after watching the film. And I said, I'm going to be honest with you guys. In most countries where I have done work, I have to worry about you more than I have to worry about the mafias. So when I see uniforms, I get very nervous because to me it triggers this reaction of, I gotta hide my videotapes, I have to hide everything that I'm working on because the good guys are usually not good guys. They're sometimes worse than the criminals because they pose as good guys. So you really cannot. And I felt that I was very scared about being dishonest and frank with them because I've spoken to FBI agents, but I have not spoken to a class of young police officers, and I didn't know how they would take that and if that would offend them. And it didn't. We were able, in a way, to open this very honest dialogue about some of the experiences I've had and also about how cops treat trafficked women. And I think if there were one lesson that I really wanted to leave them with is treat them like human beings, don't treat them like trash. Because these women remember that. And that's the reason that they will not go to you. Because they don't trust you. And for good reasons. Most of the women who I've interviewed, people always ask me, why didn't they escape? Why didn't they get away? There must have been an opportunity. There is. There's always some kind of an opportunity, and sometimes they manage to escape, and sometimes they will go to a police station. And in that police station within the same neighborhood where they're trapped and locked in an apartment, they'll walk into a police station and they'll recognize the same guy who was in the brothel or in the apartment a few days prior, but now he's wearing a uniform, and 3 or 4 days ago he was not. And this will be the same guy, the client. And that same guy who's a cop will pick up the phone and call the pimp and say, come and collect your goods. So there is such mistrust, not to mention the police raids and how these girls are spoken to, the way they're being treated, the way they're being humiliated. So, and I'm sure as you're watching the film, you can see so many different parts in the film where I really want you guys to focus on, look, cops are involved in this. They're very much greasing the wheels of the system. Because without them greasing the wheels of the system, there'll be a lot more resistance. But with them being the oil to that wheel, it runs a lot. I'm talking about the wheel of trafficking, the wheel of exploiting women. It runs a lot smoother.
And I'm gonna ask one more question before we open for more questions from the audience. And I was wondering, because also your film is about what happens after a police raid. So when these women are saved and they're sent back home. So could you elaborate a little bit about what happens after?
Yeah. What happens after is they would spend here in Norway, and I spent enough time with the police because yesterday I was at the National Police Directorate in Oslo, so now I understand a little bit more about the way the system here works. Here they would spend 6 months, sort of being, let's say, protected or having services for six months. Then they can extend if they cooperate. And cooperate is a word that has many different meanings with any police force. So in most other countries, it would be 2 to 3 months. So they get half the amount of time that they would get here in Norway. And during that period, often they're detained and they're put in prison or in like detention centers that are just like prisons. I'll give you an example in Turkey, for example. They're put in these places that are like prisons and they're tested for HIV and STDs. And those of them who test positive for STDs and HIV are photographed. They have mugshots of them. And those mugshots are published in the newspapers. I have to pause because, you know, their pictures are published in the newspapers with what kind of STD they have. Like this woman has syphilis, this woman is HIV positive, this woman has gonorrhea. Who do you think this information is for? This is before she gets deported. It's for the clients, it's for the men who have used their services. It's pretty much a warning for them, hey guys, go and get yourself, because they'll recognize the picture, oh my god, I was with her, I better go and get checked. I've also talked to a lot of wives who, you know, all of a sudden we get these STDs, you know, so it's this chain, but you know, who is being protected here? I want to give you another example. And I know I'm kind of jumping a little bit, but I know you can, I'm hoping you can connect these examples. When I released the piece that I did on Dubai, which was a different version from what you see in the film, it was a shorter version that I did for Frontline, which is a documentary program in the United States. There were all kinds of lawyers, media lawyers, who had to review it before it was shown. And the media lawyers made the following, you know, they had a list of questions about, are you sure the guys that you're filming with hidden cameras are in fact clients? And I said, yeah, I'm sure, I'm in sex clubs, I know, I see these guys, I will see these guys leave, I knew the women that they were leaving with. This is not something, this is not guesswork. I knew who these guys were and I knew what they were doing. And then the lawyers ultimately made this executive decision to blur the faces of all the men in the footage. They left all the faces of the women unblurred, but they blurred all the faces of the men. How interesting. Who are we protecting? You know? So I'm giving you this because I don't want you just to think that, oh, Turkey is this evil place, how could they do this to these women? I want to just kind of give you multiple examples of the discrepancy and why I can stand behind the statement I made when I first started talking to you, which is if poor women were a priority, we know how to solve this, but poor women are not a priority, they're disposable, and they're discarded. And think about this from an economic standpoint. If you have a police raid, and for whatever reason, 30 women are taken from a brothel or from a private apartment and put into that detention space, they're tested, go through their medical checks, and then they're put on a plane and sent back home. What is the position of the pimp who now has lost his cargo, his goods, his cattle, his, you know, the stuff that he's been selling? What's his position? he gets a brand new shipment. This is what the last guy talks about. Men here like fresh meat, they like fresh girls. He gets a whole new shipment to replace what he just lost. So for him, the pimp gets to wash his hands off of these women that are already cut up, marked, cigarette burns on their body, they're already kind of trashed. And they're actually deported, they're put on planes that he doesn't have to pay to get rid of them. He doesn't have to make them disappear. The system makes them disappear quite easily. They're deported back to where they came from. Now, if the pimp feels that the woman owes him money, can he go after her? You better believe he can, because he knows exactly where she comes from. Do you think there are witness protection programs in these places? No. What happens to the girl when she's shipped back home? She spends, 3 weeks to sometimes 6, 7 months, depending on how bad her condition is, at a secret shelter for women who have been trafficked. During that period, she receives some counseling, but again, to give you an idea, in a place like Moldova, which is the poorest country in Europe, in the secret shelter for women, which was one, there were 300 women in 1 year receiving counseling by 2 psychiatrists, one of which was part-time. How much counseling do you think these women actually get for their psychological trauma, for all their issues, emotional issues? Not much. The way that they were being dealt with is medicated. Oh, you have trouble sleeping. Oh, you're depressed. Here, take this. They were walking around like zombies. I know because I spent a lot of time in that shelter. And never really were dealt with what the issues were. And when that time of their shelter time elapsed, they had nowhere else to go but back to the villages and towns where they were trafficked from in the first place. Back in that place, if the girl has the courage to press charges and to go public and to say, this person is the person who trafficked me and this person is the person who pimped me out and here is what happened. If she has the courage to do that, she goes public. Most times, again, I hope you see this from the film, most times the trafficker is not charged. In most cases, even if they are, someone pays off whatever bribe, or in some cases, like in Albania, someone who had pimped out a 12-year-old girl for over 10 years in 3 different countries, got to serve 3 months, and then was released because his uncle was a judge. So there is no sense of justice. So then, not only that, but now because she's gone public, those in the community know that, oh, she was a prostitute. And it doesn't matter whether she was forced or whether it was free will. Once she has that stamp on her, which is prostitute, it's like a stain that she cannot remove. So when the guys in the village get drunk, I have witnessed this with my own eyes, when they get drunk, they'll come to the house, knock, and say, if you were giving it up for free over there, what about us? And that's the kind of community she's living in, not to mention the way the parents feel and the way, not everyone, but in a lot of cases. So now you start thinking about, so why are women silent? Why is it so difficult to get women to talk about this? I just gave you the reasons why. Would you tell your story if something like this happened to you? If you know what the consequences would be, and if you know that justice is not on your side, and if you know that everyone in the system is trying to get rid of you and wash their hands off of you because you're a problem for them. The country that exploited you, that used you up, they sent you back home with nothing. And the country that received you, that's your home country, thinks of you as trash. So where are you going to go? What are you going to do? What kind of job are you going to get? Just one more thing. Vika, who has a drinking problem. She's had a drinking problem since I met her, since the first day. She'll be drinking morning, lunch, and dinner. She doesn't really eat. This is her food. And with Vika, she was supposed to be getting a job training program at the shelter. She actually went back to the shelter to get training. I was back in the States. When I came back to Moldova, she's like, Mimi, you're not going to believe this, I got a job. So you got a job? That's great. What are you doing? They found me a job as a bartender. What? I said, what? I said, Vika, you're an alcoholic. You should not be serving alcohol all night. You should not be in that environment. Like, what kind of social worker interviewed you and put that plan together? That makes no sense to me. You know, it's setting someone up for failure. If someone has a drinking problem, you don't put them in the position to bartend. You get them help. So there's so many flaws in the system, from the NGOs to the law enforcement to governments, and unless those get fixed, everything that we're talking about is just the band-aid that's being put on a much, much deeper wound that makes the public feel like, okay, this is being addressed, when in fact it's just a stupid band-aid on something that's not healing. Love to hear from you.
Can I ask one more question? Because it's important. As a researcher, I always have to secure my informant's identity. And any research is heavily regulated. And as a journalist and a filmmaker, you have more artistic freedom that you could do within the legal framework as legal, at least in Norway. It depends on where you are, I guess. But still, it's an ethical choice whether to expose the identity of these women or not, and whether to go in with a hidden camera or not. And you had to make all these choices. So could you tell us something more about why you made the choices that you did?
I would love to. I would love to, because I made a decision early on, and I have over 85 hours of footage in the years that I shot, and then thousands and thousands of photographs. And I made a decision early on, which is because a lot of the interviews I shot, I had to protect women's identities, because some were either in trial, still going through the court system, or their lives were seriously in danger, and I could not disclose names or locations. So I made a decision that the women who are going to be featured in the film, I want you to see their faces. This is why instead of you seeing 20 women as characters in this film, you're only seeing 3. And I chose them very carefully. That decision was there at the beginning, and I was fought on this decision every step of the way, primarily by NGOs, whose position was, you have to protect the victim's identity, you have to protect, you know, what they look like, you have to protect, you should be changing names. I did not change names. I only used first names, but I did not change names. I did not disclose locations. These are very small communities. And also, I'm showing you their faces. This was a new paradigm in the way to tell a story about trafficking that I was very much felt responsible for, and felt that I could stand behind fully. Why? Because I felt that if I am to try to chip away at the stigma and shame that I'm talking about, that is really important to chip away at, I have to show that you have to get to know them as human beings and not in shadow. Because if I kept their faces in shadow, they remain in shadow. But if you see them, and you see what they're doing on a day-to-day basis, and I'm showing you images of them over long periods of time, you get to know them as three-dimensional human beings. And you get to relate to them more as three-dimensional human beings, and not victims. You're not putting a stamp on them that's just victim or prostitute or traffic victim or whatever. She becomes an individual. So for me, it was to really go after the stigma. And I think, and I know, that it achieved that. I'll tell you why. I get all kinds of people who come to me after screenings. Young people, older people, all different ages. I get emails on a daily basis that say, you know, here is what happened to me, and I watched your film on TV. Or someone after a screening, I told the story yesterday, I think I told it yesterday, of a woman in London who, after the screening at the Human Rights Watch Film Festival in London last year, this woman who was in her 40s came with her husband, and she was waiting in a queue to speak with me alone, and she said, you know, I'm from Australia, and I was trafficked when I was 16. And my husband is the only one who knew what happened to me. You're the second person I'm telling of what happened to me when I was 16. But now that I've seen your film and I've seen their faces and how they talk, I feel that I don't have to be ashamed anymore. This is my story as well. So to hear this reinforced hundreds of times by hundreds of different people from different nationalities, to me opens that dialogue that I very much wanted to open, which is to go after the, let's break the silence, let's destroy the silence, because there's nothing to be silent about. Now, the counter-argument would be, you're putting their lives in danger. That's a dumb argument, because if you have witness protection programs where they are actually placed in safe communities, I'll understand that argument. But the thing is that many of these girls can be re-trafficked at any point, at any time, because the pimps know exactly where they live. So how is it that me making a film about them is putting them more in danger than them being deported to the same communities and NGOs assisting them with that placement into the same homes and the same streets that they came from, that they were recruited from? So, and that, when I asked that question to NGOs, there is not an answer. So to me, and the irony is that the same NGOs that were like, shaking their finger at me all these years, like, how dare you do this? Just because you're a photographer, you think you can show fame, all kinds of arguments. Those same NGOs are now using the film as an education tool. It's like all of a sudden they're okay with showing the faces. But 5 years ago, oh my God, they wanted to throw me on the street and throw rocks up at me, stones. So yeah, that's the reason.
Thank you for many good and long answers, but I love that.
Are you too long?
No, I love it. It's good. But I hope to keep the conversation going, so I would love if there's any questions for the audience. Or otherwise, I have to sort of think of more. But
yeah, would you come up here and maybe speak in the microphone?
Oh, that's gonna keep them from asking.
Well, this subject is too important to be shy, right?
Hi, I want to thank you for a very good film. And my question is just, who are these traffickers? Are they local people who stay in the village? And
Very
to me,
good
it's
question.
unbelievable that they can keep doing this for such a long time without the rumor going around about what's actually going on.
Yeah, no, it's the rumor is going around about what's going on. It's a very good question. The traffickers are usually acquaintances, friends of friends, friends of relatives. Often, with the three women that you see in the film, they all knew the woman who trafficked them. For example, with Jenny, who is the girl who jumps, Jenny was trafficked by a friend of a relative who lives in an adjacent village, and Jenny took me to show me the house of the trafficker, to show me how well she lives. Like, people know where their traffickers live. And those traffickers continue. I'll give you another example. In Mexico, where there is a lot of trafficking of women from Central America, both women and drugs, into the United States, there are whole communities where the richest, nicest houses and nicest cars belong to the traffickers, and everybody in those towns knows that those 5 houses belong to the main traffickers who are shifting women and drugs, and the cops know it too. So it continues. So there is no secret, it's no rumor. The one thing I always say, which is, again, to go back to my original point, that we can fix this if we really wanted to. If you really want to harm trafficking, the business of trafficking is all about money and profits. That's all it is. There is no, you cannot argue, and believe me, I've had enough conversations with people who are in the industry, who exploit the women, both undercover and as a journalist. I've had enough exchanges to tell you that if you're trying to make them feel bad about what they're doing, good luck, because they don't feel bad one bit. To them, it's just cargo. It's just it's like a box of apples, or 20 women, or what a shipment of AK-47s, or a couple of kilos of heroin, or 3 girls from Moldova. It's the same thing. It's the same thing. Except with women, you can keep reselling them. So with drugs and weapons, it's a one-time delivery, exchange of money, and then you're done. You have to get another shipment. With women, you can keep using her over and over and over again. And just when she thinks she's paid off her debt, because they keep track, I've seen, if you go to priceofsex.org, you can see, I've scanned copies of journals that girls keep, calculating and adding how many clients they've had and how much they're being charged, this imaginary debt, trying to pay off their debt. And they'll collect enough clients, like they would have done all the math and say, here, I paid you the 10,000 you told me I owed you. And that very same day she'll be sold to another brothel and her debt starts all over again. Vika was sold 3 times to 3 different brothels while she was pregnant. And her debt each time started all over again. Because now she's paying for the price that she was sold at. So it's like selling a horse. And you run that horse to the ground until that horse cannot move anymore. And then you either kill it or you send it back home or you get rid of it to a worse kind of place. You know, it's the same thing. So to make them feel bad and to try to change their psychology, that's not a road I would even attempt to go on, having met so many of these people. What really hurts them is you go after their money. You go after their assets, now you can start a conversation with them. That makes them very unhappy. You repossess the houses, you take away the goods, you take away the gold, you close the bank accounts, because these guys have bank accounts in Switzerland, they got bank accounts all over the place. You start going after that, now it's hurting. Now it's telling them, okay, this is serious business. But that's not happening. But yeah, people know where their traffickers are. And the traffickers continue to go. When it gets too hot, you know, when it gets too much attention, or maybe a girl decides to press charges, they just go out of the country for 6 or 8 months. They go back to, you know, if they have an operation in Italy or Germany or Turkey or wherever, they'll go there for 6 or 8 months and then come back when things are cool again. And they have people informing them constantly of what's happening if someone dropped a case. They'll send, just like Olesia said, they'll send somebody with money to bribe. So let's say 5 girls decide to press charges because they come from the same village. The pimp will come and say, okay, $100, you guys. $100, like here's $100 US, shut your mouth. You know, or you're gonna be living in fear, we're gonna be harassing you. And people just take the money and shut their mouth. And now you have one person, Olesia was the only one with her mom that went and pressed charges. All the other girls in the village had taken the $100 and decided to zip their mouth, stay quiet. Do people know who the traffickers and pimps are? Oh yeah, you do? Well, just one more thing. They're women because women trust other women. You know, women are more likely, if I'm a recruiter and I come to you and I give you some story, you're more likely to listen to me than if I were a man. You know, because you would think, like, she cannot do me harm, she's a woman, why would she? Can you imagine? I could not, especially if it's someone who's a friend of a relative. It's an acquaintance. Let's say someone from your town came to you, and you know that it's a friend of a friend, and they said to you, you know, we have this extra ticket to go on this tour. You know, come with us. And then you guys, you know, I'm not exaggerating, it happens very easily.
Thank you very much for your strong and unbreaking documentary. I wanted to ask if you could talk more about, you said how there are different arenas for the girls. Some of the Eastern Europeans they may be inside or locked up, and the Nigerian are mostly on the streets. Can you explain more how this arena is coming about?
Absolutely. With one of the most effective ways to control women, and this is also more of a shifting pattern that's happened in sort of the last 5 to 6 years, is this notion of this very funny sounding thing called happy trafficking that the pimps are using, the pimps and traffickers. Happy trafficking is this idea of using less physical violence on the women and using more psychological control. And also, there are a couple of ways to do that. We definitely see this with women coming from Nigeria. We also see this with, patterns where you're seeing the age group drop drastically. So instead of, when I started this 10 years ago, the average age for girls sold into this from Eastern Europe was 18 to 24 years old. Now in a lot of places it's like 12 to 15. Because if you get a girl at the age of, in some places 10, 11 or 12. If you get a girl that's young, it's a lot easier to manipulate her psychologically, and also if you don't bruise her and you don't cut her, as much as they used to do. If you don't implement as much violence on her body, then her price is higher. She's not marked as much. A lot of the girls I met had cigarette burns all over their bodies, or had cuts with screwdrivers, because the pimps would use screwdrivers instead of knives and guns, because if they got caught, it's a mark by a screwdriver, which is a different penal code than something that's considered a weapon, like a knife or. So they even know what to use. They know how to beat the girls under cold water so they don't bruise as much. Some of these pimps perform abortions in the places where they keep the girls. Some of them keep them pregnant and then sell their babies. So the Nigerian women are kept under check with something that's known as a voodoo or juju curse. That's why you see so many of them on the streets, and they're not kept in apartments, they're not kept locked because they will not move. I had doctors in Athens who would try to help them and try to get them off the street, and they wouldn't go because they felt that if they left their particular corner, their family back home would be killed, and often their family back home is killed. It's just not killed by the juju, it's killed by the traffickers. But the girl thinks it's the juju that was placed on her. So some of these doctors, some of these HIV prevention doctors that you see in the film were really clever. They decided that, okay, if this is what's working, if this is the mind control that's being used on these young women, then we can reverse this mind control, but using it from their standpoint and not our Western standpoint, sort of understanding where they come from and using the same method, which is incredibly smart. So what they did is they brought in a Nigerian priest into that, like priest/witch doctor into the red light district to reverse the curse. And once he reversed the curse, the girls got into the car and went to get help. We were having discussions in Oslo that this is something that, didn't someone say last night, or maybe it was at the police? It's being talked about, right? Someone mentioned it. And it's a really, I think it's clever. It's, you have to use the same method to release people. But yeah, a lot of it is psychological control, and a lot of it is, when someone tells you, when a trafficked victim becomes a trafficker herself, when a victim becomes a victimizer, and you ask her, you've been sold to all these places, you've been raped, you've been tortured, you've had such a terrible life, why would you do the same thing to someone who's unaware? How could you trick someone, like your neighbor? I'm talking about a real case situation. If a girl tried to sell her neighbor, who was a single mom, after she had been sold in 5 different countries, she tried to do that to her neighbor and telling her some story about a legitimate job. She was caught along the way. So I got to talk to her, to the trafficker. And her answer is, the pimp offered me an extra pack of cigarettes and half the amount of clients if I went and got him fresh meat. Extra pack of cigarettes and half the clients. So when somebody is sold for that kind of duration, in those kinds of conditions, it changes a lot of that person's way of thinking and acting and everything.
from the audience?
Can I shortly comment then?
Yeah.
Because I did research on the Norwegian police, as I told you. And I think, I don't know what so to answer the question about the juju priest, I don't know whether it's a serious discussion. And right now that's not the major problem for the Norwegian police. It's actually that 90%, because women do report trafficking, they do go to the police. 90% of Nigerian cases are handlocked. I don't know what the word is, like they're not being investigated.
Why?
Difficult. Because it's the police. It's complicated issues. Most of the cases are dropped because of the evidence is not good enough, and the stories that are told doesn't communicate with the Norwegian police. And also because it's transnational, and the traffickers reside in Spain or Italy, and it's difficult to prosecute. So unless the traffickers are still in Norway, that's one reason why you might drop a case, and also because of so one discussion we're having in Norway is that these court cases, like that the women report the cases very long after the incidents have happened, and it's difficult to get evidence. So there's tons of reasons, and I'm not sure if the juju issue is the most precarious one. It might work in Greece though, I don't know. But there's also more bureaucratical explanations to why we don't have more cases.
Since I do not have any manners, I will just ask the last question myself, I think. There is a really relevant debate in Norway right now regarding whether it should be allowed or not to buy sex. As for now, it is illegal, but it is soon election time and things might change. So my question for both of you is, do you think that it in any possible way helps fight trafficking if to buy sex is illegal?
Can I start answering that?
Please.
I'm not going to answer the question actually. I'm going to divert the question. Because I think one problem with the Norwegian debate right now is that we're talking about this law, but we're not talking about what it's about, and that's male sexuality. And also, like your film, you sort of end it there. You go into the issue of male sexuality. But it's sort of, it never gets to that discussion. And we've been talking about this actually, we had an interesting conversation, and I was wondering if you could share parts of that. Some of the research that you did actually go into the issue of, you did actually talk to a lot of clients off camera. Mm-hmm. Do you want to share that with the audience?
What comes to mind? What do you tell me?
We had a discussion about the link between what goes on in the commercial, this service. So we use the word sexual services, right? But we never talk about what sexual services is. And these women that you interviewed, they do talk also about that with you. You don't share it in the film.
Yeah.
And you also interviewed clients, and you have material on where they get their, let's say, inspiration from.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, I'm actually working now on another film, which is about male sexuality. It's about, it's all about men. So that's the next film, because of what you just said. Because I feel that I left something that's very essential. I could not, and I did not go as deep as I wanted to. I felt like it needed its own story. It's that layered. During the time that I was working on this, okay, first I'm going to actually answer your question, if I may. If you look at countries that have legalized prostitution, and then you look at countries where prostitution is illegal, and you look at numbers of trafficking. I said this last night as well. You look at countries where it's legal, like Germany, Turkey, Australia, the Netherlands, and so on. You can find which countries have legalized it, and have legalized it for quite some time. And then you look at countries where it is illegal. United States, blah, 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 so on. A pretty extensive list. And then you reference, you can take the one reference that everyone talks about that's pretty thorough and that breaks down trafficking country by country. It's called the TIP report, the Trafficking in Persons report, which comes from the State Department every year and places countries in different tiers as to how they're performing and what their initiatives are. I know that there is something that the European Union is doing as well that's similar, that Norway just got sort of graded on. And so the TIP report is more like the global, you know, all the countries are listed. So if you were to look at these stats of different cases and different prosecutions and so on, it doesn't show that the countries where it's legalized are doing better with their numbers, that they have not reduced trafficking, nor are the countries where it's criminalized. You know, it doesn't show any difference, is what I'm trying to say. So that would be my answer to your question. And also my answer to your question would back up what you just said, which is, that's what I mean by sort of putting a Band-Aid on a much deeper issue. You know, it's a question that's always asked. Like, what should we be doing? Should we be punishing it? Should we be promoting it? What should we be doing? We don't know. I think exploring why people do what they do and going deeper into that and trying to change mentality and perceptions and behavior is much more valid and will yield much better results. I'll explain to you what I mean by this, which is the conversation we had earlier. When I was showing the film in Canada, you know, there is a lot of groups in Canada that want to legalize prostitution because they feel that it would reduce numbers of trafficking, and also it will protect women who are involved in the sex trade and give them rights. You know, and we would get into these debates, and my initial response would be, this film is not about prostitution, this film is about slavery, this film is about women being forced into something they did not sign up for, nor did they. A woman yesterday asked me, well, how many of these women actually knew that they were going to be prostitutes? Because even if you know you're going to be going into prostitution, you could still be considered a victim of trafficking if you're put into a situation where you're forced and you're not making any profit off of selling your body. Out of all the women I've interviewed, and there have been hundreds of women, there were only 2 who I met who knew were going to be working as prostitutes in Turkey and in Israel, and the 2 of them were sisters who were already working as prostitutes. You know, starting very young, at 12 and 13, they were prostituting in Moldova, and then they were trafficked to these countries and did not make any profit off of the job that they were performing. So, in terms of behavior, what I said in Canada is something I'm going to say now as well, which is when people ask me, so what should we be doing? You know, I think the discussion needs to be even deeper. You know, my response was, stop watching porn. Because the porn industry is very much connected to trafficking. That's a completely different discourse from should we legalize or should we criminalize prostitution, right? It's about mentality and it's about the psychology of clients, which we know very little about. Very little has been done to expose the psychology of, what did you say, male desire, male sexuality. When I was in Dubai and I was doing the undercover work, I had women from West Africa come to me because I was in this one location, in this one place, and they could tell I was new. And these women came to me. The Eastern European women did not want to talk to me at all, even though I belonged to that group, in that location, in that particular place. The West African women took me in and said, looks like you're really scared, and it looks like it's your first night, and we're going to tell you what you should be looking out for. So when the British come, here is what the men want. When the Saudis come, you better be ready for backside. I said, I don't even know what backside is. Oh, it's anal sex. You know, they're watching a lot of this stuff. I said, watching what stuff? Then I met a guy in that same place who was from Egypt, who said, here is what I want you to do. And he shows me on his cell phone clips from American porn. You know, and also the obsession with blonde women. I mean, all of this is connected. The obsession with blonde women, you know, Eastern Europeans coming to these places, guys from Saudi Arabia who are watching American porn and wanting to imitate it, guys in the United States who are watching things that they believe. You know, I was telling a story about a colleague of mine who is a professor in Texas, University of Texas in Austin, who's done extensive research on pornography and how pornography has changed in the last 20 years. And we had this incredible moment where he had us, a group of people in anti-trafficking. He said, just close your eyes. I don't even want you to look at images. Just close your eyes and listen to the language and how the language of pornography has changed. Here is what it sounded like in the 70s. I'm going to play you a clip. He plays the clip. I'm not going to give you what I said earlier. I'm not going to do all of that. And then he said, here is a clip from now. And it was so degrading. It was so, when I was in Canada, I said, how many of you know what ATM is? And this little old lady in the back raised her hand. She said, it's where you get cash from. I said, I just want to come and hug you. How many of you know what ATM is?
I just didn't think of pornography, so that's fine.
You don't have to excuse yourself, you know? It's okay. What is it?
It's ass to mouth.
Yeah, it's ass to mouth. So this is what's known in pornography as ATM. So think about this, just think about this. So when you have somebody as a client come and ask a woman to do this, if the woman is willing, she can say, well, no, this is not something, you know, I'm willing to perform. But if the woman is forced, if she's locked into a place, so the women I've been interviewing year after year, all this time, are telling me about things that they're doing that they never even imagined. And they would always ask, like, you know, where are these guys getting this stuff from? Is it just their imagination? Like, how are they making this up? And they're not making it up.
Is that what Vika is doing when she says "and never even" in the end?
Yeah. She's doing that in something else that she was talking about. But it's sort of like, I never even thought, I never even imagined some of the things that happened. She's talking about her pregnancy too. So, you know, all of these fetishes, all of this is perpetuated also by that industry. And the industry is very much geared towards humiliating and degrading women and making them feel like they're the lowest, they're the trash. And in order for that industry that appetite to be fed, you need trafficked women. You need women who are forced. You need women who have no power to say no. You need women who you can rape and degrade and burn and cut and do these things to because their bodies are trash. But it's not that simple too, because we also had a conversation about men who want intimacy, men who pay for intimacy, men who... I had a very dear friend of mine in Dubai who was helping me with this, who was also someone who had worked he was in journalism, and he was from Egypt. And he had, as I got to know him, I realized that he himself has 2 women who he knew were trafficked that he would call regulars. This was my friend. He was just a couple of years older than me, and there was nothing. I looked at him, I said, Ahmed, like, why? Like, you? Like, why? You don't need to do this. Like, why? Why are you? You know what his answer was? Like, whenever I say this in the US, the reaction is boo, you know, people don't like this response at all. But this is what he told me, and you know what? I know the guy, and I know he was telling the truth, and I'll tell you why I know he was telling the truth. He said, you know what, maybe most of the times, I don't even pay them for sex. You know what I pay them for? I pay them so when I wake up in the morning, I can feel the breath of someone on the back of my neck. And my reaction was like, yeah, right, yeah, sure. Then I met those two women, and I interviewed them away from Kim. And one of them I actually became close to. She was trafficked from Siberia. And I said to her, Sasha, I know Ahmed is someone who pays for you regularly. Yeah, he is. Tell me about that. She said, it's weird. Most of the times we don't even have sex. He doesn't even pay me for sex. So what does he pay you for? She said, he just has me watch the Animal Channel, which would always be on. Every time I went to his place, he was watching the Animal Channel. He loved that. And she said, he keeps talking about, just breathe on the back of my neck. I just want to know that you're close to me. And she said, everyone is different, but most of the times he doesn't even have sex with me. So, it's multi-layered. It's not just one. It's much more complicated, but I do think it's possible to change behavior. I do think it's possible to change patterns and to teach people how to treat. I do, because if it isn't, then it's pretty hopeless. And I think that the laws we're trying to implement and those kind of quick fixes, are not, they haven't been working. That we know, they have not been working.
I said that was my last question before, but earlier today you were interviewed by Bergen, and you said something about how you didn't really like Lilja Forever, which is probably the movie that introduced the subject trafficking to many of the people in the audience. Could you just maybe end shortly by explaining why you do not like that movie?
I don't think I'm capable of ending shortly, but I did not like, I will try to say it in one sentence. I did not like this movie as a tool for education, because it was used as a tool for education and awareness throughout Eastern Europe as well.
And also to push policy change.
Yeah, definitely, to push policy change. I did not like it because, first of all, I think using a fictionalized version of reality is always problematic, such as Taken, which is the more recent film that people are using as a point of reference, and it's ridiculous that you have some CIA guy trying to rescue his daughter who's kidnapped in Paris. So anyway, don't get me started on that, because I will not make it short. It's ridiculous. But secondly, and most importantly, I think it's a terrible message. Think about the way Lilja Forever ends. The girl she escapes and she commits suicide. And that's what these young girls are watching in schools. So they think, if I ever end up in a situation like this, my only way out of it is death. It's a terrible message to promote to young minds, because it's not, you're using this as an education tool, then give them something. Give them some kind of information that they can actually use if they're in this situation, and not give them suicide as the way out. I don't think that's healthy, I don't think that's helpful. So to me, young women watching other young women talk about what happened to them, and yeah, it's horrific, but also they're alive, they've survived, they're witnesses, they're telling their stories. And also you're being given information as to how it works. I think that's more valuable in terms of using films in outreach. I think documentary films that deal with real lives and real stories are a much better tool than fiction films.
Well, thank you for making such a film for us. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Gifts for you, of course. I'm afraid for Synnøve it's the good old flower. Sorry for that one. And then for Mimi.
I hope it's chocolate.
Of course it's chocolate, and it's even more. It's chocolate, and it's brunost, the traditional Norwegian brown cheese. There you go. Yeah. Which is about activism in Bergen, and it's made, among others, by Rubaba, who's been photographing this evening. So, yeah, this is a gift from her.
Thank you very much. Very sweet.
Thank you. I have a rumors from Oslo.
programmet.